Yeah, and there's, when you mentioned chicken and rice, in Chinese medicine, there's a principle called thermogenic property of food, and a lot of times some of the hot meats that are considered hot, lamb, venison, and sometimes chicken, can really make things worse on that
Right.
score too. So I try to avoid those initially going back whenever I can. But that's a really good point, and I always cringe a little bit when I hear the chicken and rice routine because it's. Everybody still does it. I mean, everybody still talks about it in veterinary medicine, and I know. Anyway. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Pause, Reflect, and Heal with Dr. Randy. We're going to have another really exciting episode, a question that's always on my clients' minds and my seminar attendees is, what do I feed my dog? And or cat, and we're going to talk a lot about feeding real today. And with me is Kay Stewart, who is from the Feed Real Institute. And Kay, tell us a little bit about how you got there, what you do, and then we can kind of get into what our conversation is going to be about.
Yes, thank you. My story's a little different. A lot of people get into this because they had a dog that they could not heal and they went down this path. For me, it was a career change. And so I've been a veterinary technician since the early 80s. I graduated from Purdue, and the majority of my career was spent in biomedical research. I was the associate director of the animal facilities at the University of Notre Dame, and where I was the voice for the animals. And that was a very hard position because of my love for animals, and so it didn't really align with my love for animals, but at the same time it did, because I was their voice and I made sure that they had the best life they could. However, that job abruptly ended in 2017, and I found myself at the age of 55 saying, okay, what next? I floundered a bit and ended up in the human medical field right during COVID. Terrible choice, but it paid the bills. And then I found this job in 2021 with the Feed Real Institute. I had put in, I just had to get back to my roots. I was bored out of my mind. And so I put in a search of remote and dog. And this popped up for Feed Real Institute for writer and researcher. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this can't be real. So I applied. Yeah. And when Ruby, the founder of Real Dog Box and the director of the Feed Real Institute, saw my resume, she said the same thing. This can't be real. So we connected.
I love it.
Yeah, we did. We connected and we talked and realized right away that I was a good fit because of my research and writing background. And they wanted somebody to do a lot of research and writing about dog nutrition. Because I was able to officially retire from the university, I have access to all of their databases. And so that has been instrumental in me being able to do these deep dives into these topics, because all of those articles that nobody can access online unless you pay $50 or whatever, I can get into and really dig down and see if the studies are legit. I've had a lot of training on how studies are made and, the stats and all of that. So that really, really impacted this position for me. And we just really ran with it. As soon as I started at the Feed Real Institute, we just kept pushing our limits and decided that we wanted to go into the veterinary realm. And that's why we have that professional nutrition course that is race approved for veterinarians. So we are really trying to get the veterinary professionals involved.
Perfect. And it's so exciting because I want to just tell a little backstory about me. I was classically trained in veterinary medicine, University of Pennsylvania, stayed to do a rotating medicine and internship there, went to the Animal Medical Center in New York City, which is the largest veterinary hospital in the world. I am a visual learner, so if I see a case, I'll remember it. If I read about it 10 times, I probably will forget. So having 60,000 cases at AMC, having 50,000 cases at University of Pennsylvania, it was a no-brainer for me on absorbing a lot of the material. Came to Arizona to practice and found very quickly in my practice that even though I had some incredible training, I was doing endoscopy, I was actually cutting backs for back surgery. There were no neurologists then. There were really no board certified specialists anywhere in Arizona at that time. But I found that I was putting out fires. I kept on feeling like I'd pick a medicine, I would do well by it, I would do great on the diagnostics, but I was never getting to wellness and health, what I call health span. So I went to Albuquerque to learn Chinese herbs because I met Dr. Andrew Weil, who a very famous integrative MD here in Tucson. And I said, well, it would be great to have Chinese herbs to add to my armamentarium of what I'm doing in Western medicine. Only to find out that I had to learn Chinese medicine to apply those herbs, which then led to acupuncture certification, then led to rehabilitation certification, which I love. But in that process, I met a number of people along the way where I started learning a ton about supplements, vitamins, what is real, what is not real. But really the ultimate boiled down to food. And, I tell my clients, every client that I see is an hour consult. And that's a luxury that I have being at my age and my experience level. But the initial 15 or 20 minutes is food. And what I know and to be the case is that 90% of veterinary clients want to understand what to feed their pets. 6% of that time is the conversation about food in a veterinary exam office. Many times it's a 15, 20-minute exam. The veterinarian is under the gun because he or she did not have the time to get into the food conversation. And if it is a conversation, as you know, Kay, from your experience and mine, it's Science Diet, it's Royal Canin, and again, I don't bash these companies that, I think they try to do the best that they can in the world that they're in. But I quickly learned, as you know, that these are inflammatory products. These are not healing products. Yes, they may put out the fire just like my medicines did, but they never really get us to wellness and longevity. Learned about the Dog Aging Project, learned about the Pet Obesity Project. And so I'm at a place where Kay is right in my wheelhouse because this is so important. When you look at the hierarchy of food, to me, fresh whole food is number one, and then it trickles down into the other things that I use. And actually, I have to work in the parameters many times of what my client or pet parent can afford. And sometimes some of this is not affordable, but most of the time it is when it's made sense of, like what the Feed Real Institute does. So I'm so excited that you're here because this is such a great segue for my clients, my patients, but also I always learn from these things too. So I'm planning on doing probably some coursework with you guys, which I'd really love to do. And we can go from there. So that's kind of how I got to this point.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Yeah, I think making pet parents realize that food is foundation. That is where the foundation of health starts. But at the Feed Real Institute, we always look to meet them at where they are. We are never going to shame you for feeding kibble. We're going to help you enhance it or improve it. And so that's, I think, a big difference. There's so much criticism out there from people about real food, raw food, and that's not what we're about.
Right. And I don't, like I said, even though when I do my seminars and wellness retreats and whatnot, I don't bash these other companies. I really don't. Because, like I said, I think that in the realm of what they do the best that they can. They've certainly done a lot of research. Although, as you know, a lot of that research is slanted towards what they do. And I've been in the medical research world also before I got into veterinary school, and I learned the same things that you learned when you were coming up through the ranks, that, many of these studies have a bias. Many of these studies have, and they have to prove the point that they want to prove. And so it's really important to weed out those things when you're looking at these things and weed out them critically. And I'm so glad that someone like you can do that and offer that to the people that are on feed reel and whatnot. So that's very exciting. Kay, talk a little bit about what Feed Reel Institute offers and how does that look for the pet parent, but also maybe for the veterinary professional, the technician, the veterinarian, those type of people too.
So when I started at Feed Reel, we were basically creating a manual for the Real Dog Box staff, and we quickly realized that this is stuff that the dog parent needed to have. And so we developed this dog parent course, and it covers everything from all the nutrients that the dogs needs and then also how to put it together. So when I taught at the university level, my goal was to teach you how to implement what I'm teaching. And so that's what I carried over to the Feed Reel Institute is we don't teach you just why to feed real food, but how to feed real food. And we have a lot of tips on how to do it on a budget. So we have that for the dog parent. We also have a virtual DIY live workshop that I conduct 2 to 3 times a month. And you actually create bowls of food on the workshop with me guiding you. We go through a PowerPoint, we go through all the information of how to do each component of the bowl, why you're putting that in there, tips and tricks and budget options, and we just have a great time. And so those are really, really good for the dog parent. Plus we have all the articles that are on the Feed Reel site, which is over 200. And so a lot of those are free, especially the ones that get you started. The more in-depth ones are behind a pay gate, but there's some options there too. You can join the Feed Reel membership for $9 a month and have access to all of that material. So then we decided that we really wanted to get the veterinary community online. And by creating a course that mirrors the dog parent course, I used the same outline basically, but just really beefed it up for the veterinary professional and got it RACE approved. Now RACE approved, it means that it is approved for continuing education credits for the veterinarian and veterinary technician for 10 CEs, and every vet tech has to have CEs to maintain their license. So that's incentive for them to take the course and learn about fresh feeding. So that's really helped us. And that was not an easy process. I am not a board certified nutritionist.
Right.
I put the app in and they're like, who are you to teach this?
Right, exactly. I was gonna mention that, but good for you for saying that. Yes.
Yeah. So it took about 9 months for me to get it approved. And I had to either have endorsement from 2 board certified veterinary nutritionists, which nobody would do. And so then I went out into the PhD world and found 2 nutritionists that formulate species appropriate diets for zoo animals. And they're the ones that endorse me. So by reading everything about me and reading the course, they endorsed that I was qualified to teach this course. So that is how we got our RACE approval. And we've had RACE approval for almost 3 years now.
Yeah. And as I've mentioned in many of my podcasts, when I speak to the public, I've been asked to speak at a number of veterinary meetings per se, true veterinary meetings, either veterinarians and veterinary technicians. Mm-hmm. And, the thing that's frustrating for me is with foundational medicine, with integrative medicine, a lot of these people think that I bang on drums and burn incense, and that's how I get to my, or my crystal ball, which I tell people it broke a long time ago. But the public is so thirsty for this, and the pet parent. I love pet parents because they're so enlisted in what's going on for their pet. And, I have slides about cancer rates and, all the things that, you want to have a little bit of shock and awe because you want people to understand that this is critical. But I think the thing that I love, when I have a conversation in a room about feeding, some of the hardest things, and one of the things I say a lot, and maybe this will change it when I do your course, is balancing these feedings, making sure we have the right calcium levels, the right vitamin D levels, so many of the nutrients, because I get people to come in and say, oh yeah, I'm feeding fresh food, and I'm giving them hamburger, and I'm giving them some steamed vegetables, and that's what I'm doing. And I go, well, I'm not an expert on this, but it doesn't sound very balanced to me. So, and if I feel that way, I'm sure it's not. So I'm so excited that you have that ability to do that. So that's great. That's
Yeah,
great.
and so the professional course, and even the dog parent course goes into it. But the professional course really goes into how you can talk to clients and teach them that. Because one of the things I found when going to veterinary conferences is that veterinarians will tell me that they're feeding their dog raw food, but they won't talk to their clients about it because they're afraid that they won't do it correctly. So that is one of the things that we really harp on. And for one thing, you have to think about how we eat. We don't eat off a spreadsheet and worry about micronutrients being to the micrograms of each nutrient. So we don't teach that. We teach to balance over time, and we have components that you have within the bowl. But those crucial ones, like you said, is calcium. How do you get calcium? You give them raw, meaty bones. You know, and people are like, bones? How do you give dog bones? I mean, I'm sure you've had this conversation.
Oh my God, almost every day.
Yes. They have to be raw, meaty bones. And these are
Right.
bones that are flexible and malleable, so the dog can chew them and then their digestive system can digest them. We're not talking about cow femurs and big knuckle bones. Those are recreational bones that they can gnaw on, get the fun food, the scraps off of, and then you take those away because those they can break their teeth on, right? So we talk about that difference all the time. We're talking about chicken bones and rabbit bones and the small rib bones from the cow are great for some of the dogs. And we talk about how to choose the right bones for your dogs and where to get these bones. And so, yeah, we give them, you know, raw meaty bones have to be in there, good quality muscle meat. You have to have organs in there, liver and some other kind of secreting organs. And we talk about what that means. Like a heart in the body is an organ, but as being fed is a muscle meat. So we go through all of that. And we go through that with the course, with the workshop. We also have lunch and learns for veterinary clinics, that just an hour-long session that they can get on board with. And so we really try to show all those components. We talk about fish as one of the components with the real ancestral diet, and that is because of the omega-3 fatty acids. Those are so important. You talked about inflammation, about those inflammatory kibble diets. If you get some omega-3 fatty acids, even with a kibble diet, you're going to balance that out better and reduce some inflammation. So we recommend fish in every dog's diet. And then some kind of fiber, and that can be fur. We find that fur works really well for some dogs that will eat furred items because fur has a lot of trace minerals in it, and their body can break it down enough to get some of those minerals out. Or low glycemic fruits and vegetables work too. Yeah, so variety, yeah. As I say, variety and sourcing is what we really, really push for balance.
Sure. Yeah, on the medical side, I do some things that, of course, a lot of conventional veterinarians don't do as far as testing. I'm very, very big on food sensitivity or allergy type things. And the other side is I've worked with biome for over 10 years. And I do a lot of biome work and fecal microbiome transfer and whatnot. And, you know, by doing this and then incorporating what you're talking about as far as getting that real food, we solve so many problems. And I know we're going to talk about some of these disorders as we go forward, but there's hope. You know, when I get the allergy dog that's been on Apoquel and Atopica and Benadryl and prednisone and every, you know, single ingredient prescription diet and is still having problems, you know, they look at me and they go, why? And I go, because really no one has gotten to your foundation of what needs to happen for your pet so that we can correct this. And it's not rocket science, but it's miraculous to see these animals in 6 months or a year. You know, as I tell people, and I'm sure you know, many of these problems didn't happen overnight. They're not going to get fixed overnight. I don't like the silver bullets of prednisone and whatnot because of all the side effects. But it's amazing that you can get there through what we're talking about.
I think it is, but you do need to emphasize to people that it isn't an overnight thing, and
Right.
that's one of the issues because they want it to be fixed tomorrow.
Right.
A good example is, like you said, for allergies. If you use the right herbs and teas, you can prevent allergies from happening, but it's not overnight. It takes
Right.
the body building up to it. I drink green tea every single day for allergies, and I went from taking allergy meds every single day of the year to maybe 5 days a year when it's really, really bad seasonally. And I've talked to people about that, and like, yeah, I tried that last week and it didn't work. No, it's
Yeah.
not going to work in a week.
No,
I've been doing
no,
it for 3
exactly.
years,
Yeah, yeah. Well, we're all into instant gratification in American society, so it's a little bit difficult to overcome that problem. But yeah, I love the fact that you're absolutely right. These things can really make a huge difference, especially over time, and especially giving it time. And one of the things that I mention to my clients is that many times toxicity has to come out of our animal's body, and we'll see flares, where their diarrhea has gotten much, much worse, or their skin has gotten much, much worse. And the hardest part is, holding their hand saying, let's walk through this. We'll work on this naturally. We're not going to go to antibiotics. We're not, and we'll get through this and it'll correct. And so, it's very exciting in my life. I mean, I'm 72 years old. I've been doing this for 43 years, that I still enjoy what I do day to day. And love passing it on, and that's kind of why we're doing this kind of thing too. So, I know you also do workshops, and you also, when you talked about your research articles, are you tell our listeners you're, I'm sure, looking at what's out there, coming out all the time, and seeing what would be applicable for your site and what you guys do.
Yeah, I am constantly looking at between podcasts and articles, and that's how I found you. And just looking to see what is relevant at the time. And like one of the article series I'm working on is biohacking for dogs. And, I'm about done with that, and we're talking about all of that. Finding little things, like I was doing research for joint supplements and found that cartilage has a lot of anti-cancer properties. And so you stumble upon these things, and that's not something I have read anything about in the dog world, but yet there are a limited number of articles in the human realm that they're showing that some of the properties that are in cartilage actually reduce the ability of tumors to produce blood vessels. So that anti-angiogenic effect is keeping those tumors from metastasizing. And they're looking at that for human medicine, but we haven't heard of it in canine. So by giving your dog these cartilaginous treats and animal body parts, you may be able to help prevent the spread of tumors. I'm not saying it's a cure for cancer, but it's one of those natural things you can try. And so I thought, those are the kind of things that I'll stumble upon. I'm looking at microplastics and nanoplastics in our environment and how they impact dogs. So I'm always looking for relevant things and ways that we can extend dog longevity through whole foods, and how we can even, you talked about detoxifying. How can we detoxify with whole foods and whole nutrition instead of going to medications? And so there's a wealth of information, and people will say to me, there's no science backing fresh feeding.
Right. Right.
There's so much science backing fresh feeding, and we actually have one article on our site that is just a list of 25 articles to quickly go to and prove to you that there is science behind this.
Yeah, yeah. And that, that's so critical because, obviously I get a lot from the veterinary community that, there's no double-blind study on what you're talking about. And, some of it, of course, is experiential medicine, evidence-based medicine. And, some of it there is science, but digging it out, like, you do have to find little bits and pieces that you can utilize that make sense, and will back up the things that, that we're talking about. So it's fabulous that you have those offerings. That's great. So let's talk a little bit about fresh feeding. Define that for us. What does that look like? Talk about maybe some of the categories of that. I know you and I could talk about this for probably 3 hours, or maybe more. But tell our listeners a little bit about that.
Yeah, so at the Feed Real Institute, like I said, we never kibble shame. We always say that, there's ways to improve kibble, so that we can start with that is by adding kibble toppers. And that can be any components of the fresh food diet. That can be adding raw meaty bones to the dog's diet. If we do that, we recommend that you do that separate. You give them their kibble in the morning and give them a bone later on so that their body can adjust to a different type of digestion. But if you want to transition to a fresh diet, that can either be raw or it can be gently cooked. And that really depends on your own preference or your dog's preference. My biggest takeaway in every workshop that I do is you are feeding that dog in front of you. I've given you all these tips, and then you need to see where they apply for your dog. Every dog is different. And so a PMR diet, or the Prey Model Raw, that just consists of bone, meat, and organs may be great for your dog. That may be all they need. And that's where you'll see these meals that say 80-10-10. So that's 80% muscle meat, 10% bone, 10% organ. And so that could be fine for your dog. Other dogs need that vegetation. And it really is, what's your feeding philosophy? Do you think dogs need that vegetation? And so that would be the BARF diet, that biologically appropriate raw food diet for your dog. That includes 10% of the vegetation. And then the Real Ancestral diet that we promote is addition of 10% fish, which you take out of the muscle meat category, and then making sure that you have that fiber component, and that can be the low glycemic vegetables and or fur. And that just kind of rounds out all of those different categories of nutrients. The other thing we really, really stress is variety. You do not want to find one diet that works. And that's what worries me about the spreadsheets, because you can work so hard to find that one diet that works and everything's in order, and you don't want to stray from it because it took so long to figure it out. And so variety is so key. So every month or every couple of weeks, you change up what proteins you're putting in there, what organs you're putting in there, what vegetables, just have a really good variety of food for your dog, just like you feed yourself. And that's going to hit all those nutrient points. And then the other thing that we always recommend is working with your veterinarian for tracking, running those annual blood tests, running hair tissue analysis, and making sure the minerals are all there. You can do omega-3 testing now right from your home. You don't even have to have the veterinarian there. There's so many different things you can do if you're worried about your dog's nutrient levels. But the other thing I tell people is hands-on. You pet your dog, you feel those ribs, you look at their shape, you weigh them on a monthly basis. That's going to tell you what's going on. And then also watching what your dog's poop. I mean, we talk about poop all the time at the Feed Real Institute. That tells us so much.
So Kay, we talked a lot about some of the different categories of real fresh feeding. Talk a little bit about, obviously our clients, pet parents, listeners always have concerns, and you've mentioned there's two major ones. Let's talk a little bit about that, because I think that will dispel a lot of myths for people.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest concerns I hear from everywhere I go is bacterial infection, cross-contamination. They worry about if you're feeding raw food that your dog's going to contaminate other people, they're going to get sick, that kind of thing. And so we have a full article on that in both of the courses. But the bottom line is dogs have lysosomes in their mouth, in their saliva, that actually break down bacteria. Their gastric juices, the stomach acid, is more acidic than battery acid, and bacteria can't survive that. And that they're just made for that. I mean, that's what their bodies are made to do. And so you use common sense. When I go in and food prep, which I food prep for 2 weeks at a time for 2 dogs, I go in and, get everything done. I disinfect my entire kitchen, including washing my floor. It's just common sense that you clean. And then, people will say, well, that'll take forever. I can do 2 weeks for 2 dogs in less than 2 hours. And that's from start to finish. And so once you get good at it, I get it. I've been doing it for a few years now, and it's it's just second nature. But those are the things you do. I wash the dogs and cats' bowl. I do have 2 cats that we transitioned also to raw feeding. All bowls get washed after each meal. I have a doodle, and so her face gets cleaned frequently if she has anything on that bearded, part of her muzzle. You just do those kind of common sense. You keep the yard clean, especially if you have kids around. But I have seen more cases or heard of more cases of toddlers, especially getting sick from kibble than from raw feeding, because kibble stays in that bowl. They go and play with it, you know, and so I think that concern can be mitigated. You get high quality meats and proteins and organs, and it's all human grade. You're going to have good products for your dog. And if you are worried about that, then gently cook the food. That's fine. Sear the outside of it gently, so you're not causing a lot of overheating where it breaks down nutrients, but the outside's decontaminated, if that's what makes you feel comfortable. Those are all ways that you can mitigate that.
Yeah, we get a big pushback here in Arizona because of our heat, and people are worried about contamination because of the the heat problems that we have, obviously, especially like when you get shipped frozen foods and whatnot. And it is a concern because you can get a frozen box of something in the middle of July here, and I guarantee you in 2 hours it'll not be frozen any longer, just because you could cook an egg off the sidewalk, So I don't know if you get that in Nashville very much, but we see it. So it obviously we get a lot of pushback on that side. So
well, and again, that's something you're going to have to be aware of as the consumer.
Of course.
And be expecting that box. Or if you do it a DIY at home, then you go out and get everything yourself and you have total control. That's what I love about doing it yourself and making your own meals and putting those components together, because you have total control over that. And I think that's a big issue.
Yeah. And also just the other concern that I get is I have an awful lot of working people that I see, and their concern is not having the time to do it themselves. Through the coursework, you have recommendations for prepared meals and whatnot. Is that right?
Right. We teach you how to do it, not only easily, but on a budget also. So people that are concerned about money, I spend about $75 a month on my 40-pound dog, and that's with all fresh components. And I have found a co-op. I have to drive an hour away, and I plan ahead. So I buy 2 months worth at a time. I go and get everything there. And like I said, for about I've spent about $125 a month for the 2 dogs. So it's a 30-pound golden doodle and a 40-pound Aussie doodle. And to me, you can't buy good kibble, if you will, for that. And so you can do this on a budget. And we have so many tips that we give during the workshop of how to find good products a lot cheaper, making relationships with farmers. And that's one of the ways I do it. Like I get all the free turkey and chicken heads from my one friend who raises them. And when they harvest, she keeps the heads for me and gives them to me for free because they're going to throw them away. So there's so many ways you can do that. And as far as time goes, like I said, I do 2 weeks for 2 dogs in 2 hours. So it's 28 meals. And so you just set that time aside. Every other Sunday, I know I'm going to be doing food prep. And I just, put that time aside and make sure that I have it done. So I think it's doable if you are committed to it, and you need to, if you want to, and if you enjoy it. I love doing food prep. I have fun doing it. The dog's waiting there for me to drop something, every minute I'm doing it.
Of course. Yeah. I'm sure the cats are also very interested.
The cats are outside. I could not have the cats inside. I have a screened in deck and they're outside. They're my daughter's cats. And
Yeah, we don't have that luxury in Arizona very often just because the predator situations are so bad. So
that's
we have
why
people
it's screened in.
Yeah, we do have people have catios, which is great.
Yep.
So I love that.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's exactly why we did it.
Sure. So the other thing I want to ask you is the other concern that you mentioned when we talked is nutrient imbalance. And talk a little bit about that.
Okay. So again, we talked about the components that you need to put in there. So you need bone, you need muscle meat, you need liver and some other secreting organ. You need fish if you're doing the ancestral diet, and then you need some type of fiber. And by mixing those up and giving a variety of meats, giving a variety of bones, giving a variety of even different fish, like I give sardines sometimes, I give smelt, I get anchovies, I get, whatever I can find. And other places that you can really find really good fish options is ethnic markets. And you can find some unique proteins there too. And they're usually more inexpensive than at your big box stores. So those are ways that by rotating what you're feeding, you're going to be hitting all those different nutrient points. Shellfish have a ton of great nutrients in there. Zinc is one of the things that people worry about. Feeding oysters is a huge a really easy way to feed zinc. But the other thing is if you're getting high quality meats, especially grass-fed, grass-finished meats, they're going to have more of the nutrients in them too. So just rotating all of those around and getting all the different types of meat, different types of proteins, you're going to hit all those different nutrients. And that's what I said earlier. I don't like when people fixate on one recipe because and yes, maybe you're hitting all those nutrients, but the bottom line is you really don't know, because every time you get a new crop of beef or chicken or whatever, they could have a totally different nutrient profile.
Sure. Makes sense. So we did have a couple listeners that emailed us before the show, and one of the questions that came up, if you don't mind addressing, is they were looking at some of the frozen, lightly cooked meals that are delivered. What's the Feed Real Institute's position on that, or what are your thoughts on that, I should say? Yeah,
my thoughts are there's some good ones out there. Right. But you need to be comfortable with the manufacturer, because we keep seeing all these issues with raw food.
Yep.
A company should be very transparent on what they're doing. I refuse to give my dog synthetics because the synthetic vitamins and minerals are just not processed properly in their body.
Right.
So looking at those, I know there's a couple of them that we partner with at the Feed Reel. One of them is Evermore, and one of them is Goodness Gracious. And both of them avoid using any synthetics. That's something I look for. But transparency is the big thing. If you call and talk to them and they say, oh, well, we don't want to go into that because that's proprietary. Yeah. Hang up. Got it. Everything should be extremely transparent. So got it. That's my take on that. I mean, I get it. If you don't have time, some of those, commercial diets are good. But you have to look, are they still putting a ton of carbohydrates? Some of them are still putting a ton of carbohydrate fillers in there. And that's one of the bad things with kibble is the level of carbohydrates. Dogs don't need those starchy carbs. That's what's causing all this inflammation. So you just need to do your homework on that and figure out which one works for you. Perfect. Thanks for answering that. We have a little bit of time left. Let's talk a little bit about some specific conditions. Maybe you could address that. Let's first talk about skin and allergy, because obviously that's a huge proportion of what I see in my practice. Absolutely. I think with the skin and allergy issues, getting to fresh food really, really helps because you're dropping that inflammation down. Kibble has really high levels of omega-6 fatty acids, which are inflammatory. And so by getting omega-3s in there and just bringing that inflammation down, that's huge right there. But like you said, a lot of them have been on these elimination diets and they still can't figure out what's going on. So what you're talking about is getting that testing done can help. But elimination diets, I found one article that showed that they did DNA testing on these diets and they were totally opposite of what the bag said. It was supposed to be kangaroo and fish and there was chicken and beef in there, and so the poor consumer is trying so hard to figure this out. So again, a fresh food diet, you're just giving beef or you're just giving turkey or whatever protein that you're giving, and you have so much more control. And so that to me is why we can really control this with the allergies. And by providing extra omega-3 fatty acids, you're giving the skin the foundation it needs
Sure.
to create a good skin barrier, create a good skin microbiome. You don't want to keep disrupting that microbiome on the skin by constantly bathing and giving all these products. So that's why I think the whole food diet really works well with allergies. You can pinpoint what it is your dog is actually allergic to, which in most cases is very minimal. It was all the fillers and dyes and, palatants and all of that they were actually allergic to.
Absolutely. And, I find that, to jumpstart some of what you're saying, again, when I work on microbiome itself and get some DNA analysis and whatnot, I can jumpstart that a little bit, but only with the proviso that we go to this, what we're talking about, we've just talked about for the last 35, 40 minutes, because, without that, we're really missing that piece. You can't, again, it's like you can't just give a pill or do an FMT procedure and correct the problem and have it last. It's just not
You have
happen.
to support that microbiome to make it
Absolutely.
last long term. So,
Absolutely.
and that's why with people that, can't give up kibble, the first thing I tell them to is we're going to add fish to the top of that bowl then. And if you consistently add a good amount of fish, you're going to balance those fatty acids. And right then and there, you're helping the inflammation. And that inflammation impacts not only the skin, but also the joints and cognitive health. So
Absolutely.
you're and a myriad of other things too.
Yeah, absolutely. We've talked a little bit about biome. Let's talk about GI disorders. Again, another huge proponent of what I see in my practice. So maybe you could talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, I think the hardest thing that I've seen, I had a colleague that had a doodle that every 3 months was at the vet with the GI issue. Every 3 months she was putting her back on metronidazole. Every 3 months the dog, it was just, and I tried so hard. I had just started at the Vedril Institute and really tried. And I trust my vet and this is what she recommends. And they put the dog down because of this. And it was just it was heart-wrenching. Yes. And so if you can get that microbiome corrected with whole food and maintain it that way, it's so much better. I mean, even that case of, okay, my dog has diarrhea, we'll give it chicken and rice. That is old school. Rice is inflammatory. There's no nutrients to it. So, we go into the whole thing of, fast that dog for 8 to 12 hours, bring it back on some, bone broth and some really soothing things for the tummy. There's a bunch of herbs that you can use. I love slippery elm or marshmallow root to keep in my house to help control that. Sure. And, slowly bring them back to bland proteins, some pureed pumpkin, stuff like that that can slowly heal that GI tract and then get them back to a good diet. I mean, all of our dogs, my dog, when I was gone last year, my daughter reached out to me and she's like, she's been vomiting and having diarrhea for the last 8 hours. Right. Well, so I'm 2,000 miles away trying to diagnose it and we got her back, but she had found a toad and she had picked the toad up and it just destroyed her GI tract. And what did we do? We fasted her for 12 hours, started giving her a little bit of water and slowly brought her back with bone broth and some really bland whole foods. 24 hours later, she was fine.
Yeah, and there's, when you mentioned chicken and rice, in Chinese medicine, there's a principle called thermogenic property of food. And a lot of times, some of the hot meats that are considered hot, lamb, venison, and sometimes chicken, can really make things worse on that score too. So I try to avoid those initially going back whenever I can. But that's a really good point. And, I always cringe a little bit when I hear the chicken and rice routine because it's... Everybody still does it. I mean, everybody still talks about it in veterinary medicine, and I know. Anyway, we won't go there, but we both know. And if I never saw another dog on metronidazole, I'd be so happy.
I tell you, that's just so disheartening.
And when I tell people, that antibiotic was created to wipe out your bacteria flora, so bowel surgeons could go in to your abdomen, and if they spilled something, you wouldn't get peritonitis. And that was kind of where it came from initially. So wiping out all of the bacteria is not a great idea.
Not a great idea, right?
Yeah. So I see a lot of rehabilitation cases, and so we see a lot of joint pain and joint cartilage type disorders. Of course, the whole cruciate ligament, is such an
Right.
epidemic in our dogs and whatnot. And so maybe you could talk about that for a second.
Yeah, I think we can address that in multi ways, but one of the things I like to remind people is if you have a really active dog, don't wait until their joints are shot. Start supporting them young. I give my dog cartilaginous stuff all the time because that's going to have the cartilage, the collagen, the glucosamine, and
Yep.
the chondroitin all in there to support those ligaments and tendons. Manganese is huge for those ligaments and tendons. And I think that's one of the things they're finding with these CCL dogs, that a lot of them are deficient in manganese. And so that's where we're talking fur is such a good way to give them manganese. But there's also other ways. Mussels have a lot of manganese, especially green lip mussels. Green tripe has a lot of it if you can give your dog tripe. And even some of the really good quality meats will have a lot of manganese in the bones.
Sure.
So just those whole food nutrients are going to provide for those joints and ligaments and tendons. And start them young. Don't wait until your dog is limping.
I love that.
And,
I love that.
and in need, which I think most people do.
Yeah. Yeah, and we so harp on omegas here because it's so dry in Arizona. We have no humidity, and so you can see it in as I tell people, the coat is a mirror to the inside of the body. We see it so often in excess non-essential shedding and white flaky skin and obviously with all the joint issues. So it's great that you talked about that. I think that's wonderful, and I think we also want to make sure we mention that what you're mentioning is basically, when you talk about manganese, we're not talking about supplementing manganese as a synthetic. We're talking about, okay, good. I just want to make sure, because you mentioned that before, but the first thing someone's going to say to me is, well, can I go to Whole Foods or Sprouts and buy some manganese? And yeah, okay. Good.
No.
Good. The obesity thing we've talked, we've mentioned really because of all the carbohydrates.
Right.
It's such an epidemic. I love the fact that the one thing I think I saw from the pet obesity work is that 60% of our animals are overweight, but when you ask the client, 6% of them will know or admit that they think their animals are overweight. And that's so true. That's so true.
Yep.
One of the hardest jobs I have is staring across, the floor. I don't use tables. My animals are all on the floor, and staring across the floor and looking at two clients that are very overweight, and their animal is very overweight. And I had a dog yesterday. It came to me. It was recommended to have bilateral TPLO surgery for its cruciates, and it's. Honestly, the dog weighed, I would say, 90 pounds. It was a 45-pound dog.
Oh my gosh!
But the surgeon never discussed weight. They just wanted to go in and fix the cruciates. And I said, please, even if you decide to have that surgery, which I don't think you need, let's work on the foundation. Let's get the weight off of your pet because we'll get so much further along, and the surgery will mean that much more if you really have to have the surgery. Most of our animals are coming here because we do the rehab. We don't, they don't want to have surgery.
Right.
Which works, in our hands, works great most of the time.
Yeah, and the obesity thing, it's funny because I'm reworking some of our articles on that because some more new language has come out, and just really focusing on the health of the animal rather than the look of the animal or, talking about it being fat or obese. No, the immobility and the pain and, focusing on those things. But you're right. I have a Aussie Doodle. She's 92% poodle. And standard poodles are supposed to be very lean and have that nice, hourglass figure, if you will. And so people are always, strangers will come up to me and tell me my dog's too skinny. And I'm
Always.
No, she's perfect, And they just aren't used to seeing a lean dog.
That's
and
correct.
So,
That's correct.
And I just, tell them, well, according to what I know, this is perfect body score for her. And so...
we have a bunch of other things we could talk about. We're running out of time. So maybe you could just talk a little bit about cancer. And I know, again, we could spend episodes on this.
Right,
but,
right.
Talk about the relationship of what we've been talking about with cancer prevention.
Well, cancer is an inflammatory disease. All of us have cancer cells in us, and our body keeps it from becoming cancerous. So by feeding the body correctly, you can mitigate cancer. You can keep it from taking over. And one of the key things is that cancer thrives on sugar. Kibble is just full of sugar. All those carbs break down to glucose, and that feeds cancer cells. If you switch to protein and fat, and the body is relying on those for energy, the cancer can't survive. They can't. The cancer cells can't grow that way. And so all of this inflammatory issues that we're talking about, and it also goes into diabetes, is another thing that we have a problem with all these carbohydrates and obesity. It's all linked together. So yes, there's other things that are going on with cancer, genetics, toxicities, all this other stuff. Maybe some of it you cannot control, especially the genetics, but you can control the epigenetics. You can control how those genetics play out in your dog by properly feeding them. And so I think by giving all of these foods that have some anti-cancer properties, mushrooms are a huge anti-cancer additive that you can put in your dog's food, along with just a fresh food diet in general. There's a lot of things you can do to prevent them, or if you get the diagnosis, work with one of these holistic pet coaches that really go into all of these modalities, all these different food additives that you can do to help the dog's body fight the cancer. So there's so much we can do for that.
That's great. And in my seminars, my public seminars, we talk a lot about epigenetics and nutrigenomics, Gene Dodds' term, and it's really fascinating how that affects what we're set up to be and do, and people love that because they realize they can make a difference, and just like all of this is where we can make a this in our pet population. Kay, I can't thank you enough. I mean, this has been so enjoyable. One, I will see you in San Diego this summer. It's in my backyard, so it's easy to do. And I'm definitely looking forward to some coursework. My time gets a little bit crazy, as of course, of what all I'm doing, but but that's okay. I this is really important, and I'm looking forward to learning more myself. But everything you've said has been so educational. Again, we're going to post the Feed Real Institute contact information on the show notes and all that, and hopefully we'll have all of the follow-up. But I can't thank you enough for your time and for educating our listeners, because it's invaluable.
That's great. It was very enjoyable. I love talking to you.
Yeah, thanks again. Hopefully we'll talk soon.
That sounds good. Thank you, Randy.
Okay, thanks,
Bye-bye.
Kay.